A Catholic bishop seems to think he knows why there is a mental health crisis affecting children. Well, if anyone knows how to drive children into a downward spiral, it is certainly a member of the Catholic clergy. They have expertise in covering up sexual assault and demanding young girls into thinking that they're inferior to men. Richard, what is it that this child psychology expert attributes to mental health crisis or crises affecting children?
I assume you were saying child psychology expert in quotes.
Oh, that's right. That is a quote unquote remark.
In his recent address, U.S. Catholic Bishop Robert Barron raised concerns about the burgeoning mental health crisis, attributing it to what he terms a second pandemic, highlighting the staggering rise in depression and suicide rates, especially among youth. Barron points to the social media as a significant contributor. He emphasizes the adverse effects of increased screen time, particularly during the pandemic lockdowns, leading individuals to retreat into their virtual worlds and losing meaningful direct social connections. Barron underscores the importance of genuine human connections for happiness and argues against the culture of self-centeredness perpetuated by social media. Drawing on insights from psychologists like Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung, Bishop Barron suggests a spiritual dimension to psychological problems, linking the decline in religious belief to declining mental health. He advocates for a return to spiritual values, positing that true fulfillment lies in transcending self-preoccupation and embracing genuine connection with others. Bishop Barron stated, and I quote, "The greatest source of human suffering is idolatry, false worship," end of quote. Perhaps the bishop should produce some evidence to substantiate that the worship he encourages is to a God that actually exists. I also think that this Catholic bishop should research how much sexual abuse of children by authority figures contributes to depression and other lifelong psychological problems for the victims and the nearby children, worrying if they're going to be the next victims. Mm-hmm. This story comes from a Farmers Forum.com. Article was written by Patrick Mager, and it's out of Canada on April 10th, 2024, with some questions and commentary by Richard Allen.
Yep. So you bring up some good points there. And, I want to turn to Scott and get his opinion. Scott, is this bishop kind of grasping at straws here in order to establish a narrative that the church will solve problems created by social media? I think it's significant to mention that they staved away from problems created by the church itself and instead look to find some other scapegoat for maybe a decline in youth mental health stability, if you will. It seems like that article anyway was building up to this idea. What are your thoughts on that?
I think absolutely he was grasping at straws. I mean, this would be a textbook case. It amazes me how much this man was able to pull straight out of his ass and put into this article. It was just utterly bereft of anything of value, with one small exception. He did point out that there was studies. He didn't specify any particular studies, but he said that there's been studies that have shown an association between use of social media and depression in youths. What he failed to mention is that there's also numerous studies that show that there's no association between the two. Some even show that there's a positive association between the two. But most importantly, what he failed to mention is that in none of those studies, at least none of the ones that I found, and I did a pretty exhaustive search, none of them indicate any kind of causation. And, and we could certainly even imagine a reverse causation there. Like if somebody's depressed, it's easy to imagine that would drive them to increase their social media use. If they're feeling down, if they don't want to get out of the house, they don't want to do things, you could easily see somebody turning to social media to have, a certain kind of outlets or something. And so the fact that it's just so up in the air, the fact that he was drawing any kind of conclusion at all is dubious, but the fact that he was trying to present it in such a way that, and we happen to have this unique solution, right? Mm-hmm, Jesus Christ, right there. And it was just utterly, utterly ridiculous. And it was difficult to read. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I agree with you there. But even in the midst of that difficulty, I thought Jonathan had some good points that he's bringing into the show tonight. So, Jonathan, I wanted to ask you about the thoughts you had on hyper access to information. Um, is it maybe not necessarily social media itself that's the problem, but the accessibility of social media that causes people to have certain expectations that, when unfulfilled, maybe cause anxiety or depression? What is this hyper access to information relationship with what we're talking about tonight?
Well, what I first thought about this, I thought about Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, and how that affects people. When we get overloaded with information, we tend to want to simplify things, and when we do that, we start simplifying things about ourselves, and then you can follow that road into a depression. You can follow the overstimulus and overpowering your mind's ability to process all that information can be rather overwhelming. You start feeling overwhelmed. It leads to other emotional issues. I don't think that social media is causing that kind of depression. I think social media actually gives people connection with other people. It may not be physical, and I think people do need physical contact with friends and that to really feel that connection, but it helps them when they're not able to do that. And so I'm kind of in this position of saying, I think a lot of the issues we're having with social media is that they're not, and I hate to say it this way because I'm going to get jumped on, they're not governed well. The people who are running it for the usual capital that they get for running a business, instead of trying to keep the content under some sort of control that isn't going to denigrate people. Students aren't going to get bullied by fellow students, that sort of thing, which causes a lot of that. But the access to other people, and some of them not very nice people, can also be contributing to it.
Well, I think you raise a good point. I mean, they're not governed well, but let's not just blame the media companies, but let's also take a look at parents. Me being a parent of a teenager myself, I think there's a balance.
My sympathies on that one.
Yeah, hey, it's been the greatest reward of my life, but also among the most challenging. And I'll take the challenge every day. But I will say, parents have some role to play in this. I can tell you that from what I have seen so far, Jesus or Catholic churches are not helping at all. In fact, I want to jump over to Richard and ask, Richard, this Catholic official, saying it's a Catholic bishop, saying that, he's got the answer and social media is to blame. But isn't this a case of the pot calling the kettle black? Doesn't the church own some cause, at least, for mental health issues with respect to their doctrine, especially how it affects children? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think broadly, there's a lot of things about the Catholic. I mean, this guy is a bishop, so he's not, maybe this, maybe that. He's doctrinaire. Otherwise, you don't get to become a bishop. Where he says the decline in religious belief to declining mental health. How does religious belief that you put a wafer in your mouth and it becomes part of the body of Jesus, how does that help kids become rational and understand the world better? I mean, this is what was Dawkins' major book on religion, The God Delusion? There's lots of psychologists that will say that if you took a religious thing and took it outside of the group and did it, you'd be delusional. I mean, imagine if somebody like Abraham today talked about wanting to take his kid up on a hill and tie him down to a bunch of wood and burn him to death. They'd lock him up. That would be at least a 72-hour hold, and probably longer than that.
It'd probably be a lot more complicated than that.
Well, but let's face it. The point is, these are people here who again are distinctly outside of the range of reality, trying to tell other people what is causing them psychological problems. And I think what Scott said earlier is, the proper orifice that he's bringing this stuff from.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to pivot to Scott because, Scott had some concerns or some thoughts on the fact that atheism, how is atheism to blame? I mean, the title of this article is Atheism and Smartphones Lead to Depression. But Scott, you make a point that atheism isn't even hardly mentioned in this article. What do we have to take away from that?
Well, the impression that I got is that, first of all, in the headline, he mentions atheism first before he mentions social media. And in the article, he spends 90% of it talking about social media. And then it was like at the end, he was like, oh yeah, I got to tie this to atheism somehow. And again, it was just ridiculous and dubious and spurious conclusions. And so he just mentions briefly at the end that he didn't even pretend to cite a study. He just says, atheism leads to that, spiritual deficit and so forth. And again, we have a situation where studies show a variety of things. There are some studies that show that there is an association, at least some sort of association between a person's religiosity and their happiness level and their depression level and their frequency of those types of issues. Some of the studies that I found, though, showed that there was kind of a U-shaped curve that result, meaning that people that were strongly committed to one end of the spectrum or the other, the very religious and the very non-religious, tended to be the most comfortable in themselves and were the most satisfied with their situation. And it was those people in the middle, a lot of the the spiritual but not religious, or the fence sitters and that kind of thing. That's where the highest incidence of depression and those types of issues came up. And so, at best, he's telling half the story, but I think really what he's doing is like you said before, he's just grasping at straws. I think it's no small amount of irony that the word scapegoat has religious origins, right? Back in the days when they used to take a pig or a goat or something, and they would take the curses and the demons and the devils out of an individual and throw them into the pig and then kill the pig or eat the pig or whatever they did with it. And that's what's happening here. He doesn't, as was already mentioned before, the eyes do not look back on himself. He doesn't look at the problems that the Catholic Church and religion in general can cause. He's just saying, oh, there's a problem, must be them. And it's really kind of asinine. You
bring up a great point. So the sacrificing of animals and things like that, this kind of old style thought process. I thought Jonathan comes in with a good point when he mentions the bishop quoting Carl Jung. Jonathan, can you talk to us a little bit about that? You had a very interesting quote that I'm not going to steal your thunder by reciting, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this bishop's relationship with Carl Jung.
Oh man. Jung said that all problems are spiritual. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So imagine that as a deal, And the thing is that even Jordan Peterson's quote in there was bad enough, but his quote, of course, is that misery is due to, oh shoot. I'm messing it up here.
Well, hold on, Jonathan. Before you move on to Peterson, but when you talk about the Carl Jung quote, you say this bishop had to dig up a quote from a 60-plus-year-old means, right? Does this bishop?
Yeah, because Jung died in 1961. Mm-hmm, so it's like, and he was, and he was an aficionado of Freud as well. So you're talking late 1800s, and to the early, and him through the early 1900s. So somebody who's working in psychology through the probably the teens, 20s, and 30s and 40s, if you have like a 40-year work life. And this guy's, most of his things, he was the father of a whole bunch of analytical psychology. I'm not denigrating his original work for the period of time. However, we have moved on from Freud and Jung. And Jung really, with his whole thing about the oversoul, or the soul, the consciousness of everybody and the archetypes, it's been long kind of disproven. So it's like anybody who's going to quote Jung that goes back that far to find a scientist or somebody who's valid in some field, it's like we always run into the problem, people going back to Darwin for evolution.
Yeah.
We've come a long way.
And when you have a bishop making an argument against social media and using somebody who's been dead for, I don't know, 60 years, you kind of run into an issue, right, of legitimacy. Yeah. And that is a great point. And, Richard had some other points. Richard, you have some thoughts about the demeaning of women in scripture by the church, some the massive wealth increase. How are these things exacerbated by other means, or means other than screen time?
There are clearly studies right now that show a lot of young people are not looking toward a very bright future because they've got so much college debt. They've got problems with, thinking about getting jobs that are going to move them up. The whole paradigm before was, were your kids going to have a better life than their parents? I can consciously say I did, economically at least. I mean, there's a lot of other factors. But with regard to this thing about happiness and depression, I just want to point out a little bit of worldview. They do these studies every year or two. I don't know if it's the UN or some other group that does it, about happiness index. The happiest countries are the least religious countries. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Amsterdam, Holland, Switzerland, and we
Japan.
we were most of the time right around 18. And I think in the last one we fell down to about 25. So, and we are one of the industrialized nations. We are the most religious. So, those kind of things show you a lot in terms of what really works in a social environment, as opposed to some guy who's spent most of his life studying theology, which some people say shouldn't even be a subject because it's about nothing.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think this article was a little bit strange. I think this Catholic bishop having an opinion on mental health and blaming it on everybody else, but the kind of threads, the fabrics that create society that have Christian influences is a little bit misguided. It's misdirected. Scott, I wanted to get your take. We talked a lot about a lot of different points tonight on this article completely, specifically. What did you think about the article overall? I mean, were there any points that made any sense, or was this whole thing just ridiculous?
I mean, there was like I said, he mentioned some actual studies, but other than that, it just seemed like it was just rhetoric. And he was just trying to, kind of dredge up a reason to point fingers. And we mentioned how he didn't really say anything about atheism until the end, even though that was like not the number one word right at the top of the headline. And so, it was, he was definitely reaching and failing to make that connection. And so, I mean, it was a blog post. And so, he's entitled to his opinion. He's entitled to share his opinion. But, as far as getting any kind of worthwhile information, or even sharing any worthwhile information with his with his readers. I think it was just an utter failure. Quick comment on the Jordan Peterson comment. He quoted Jordan Peterson, who said, "There is no technical difference between thinking about yourself and being miserable." And I think that, to me at least, that's more of a comment on Jordan Peterson's frame of mind than anything else. So I just want to ask Jordan, are you okay? And, is there something we can do for you here? But yeah, it was just vacuous, and it was schoolyard name calling is really all it was.
Yep. And on that note, Jonathan, I did cut you off before when you started talking about Jordan Peterson, trying to keep things on topic, but now we're back. And I wanted to just kind of let you continue your thought that I so abruptly kind of shifted gears on.
No, that's fine. I think that the comment about yourself and being miserable, thinking about yourself and being miserable, or self-centeredness, I guess is what he was thinking of. If thinking about yourself as a misery to you, you probably have deeper issues than just the thought that you were told you were ugly and your breath stinks by the middle school bully. It's like, it's just such an absolute red herring, in a sense, to try and blame something on something that's not even related. So if you think about yourself and you think about yourself in a positive light, that's good for your self-esteem and causes good things to happen. So if it doesn't have anything to do with misery necessarily. It's just a separate thing. So I just find that is absolutely disingenuous in a way.
Richard, we talked about go ahead, Richard.
I actually have a couple of thoughts I want to throw out there. Number one, Scott brought this up a little bit, but I want to amplify it. And then I've got one other final little thought. But, you talked about the way this thing was done. This was a classic example of a manipulation article where they used the theory of primacy. What you put out first has the most impact. So they throw in the thing they hate the most. Then they don't talk about it. They bring up all this other stuff. Then they bring it back again. This was, if this guy was in a English class somewhere, I'm getting graded for he would have got an F. I mean, it was terrible. It was totally manipulative. Now, one final thought in the theme of what we're here about. There's a lot of correlation between people's self-esteem and depression. People with good self-esteem don't find themselves depressed very often. Okay, this is a reality. What is one of the fundamental principles of Catholicism that causes a lack of self-esteem? Original sin. You're bad from the beginning. So, you have to grow up with that if you're really indoctrinated into that. And you're not going to feel good about yourself until maybe you have some, supposed meeting with Jesus or something. But that's the kind. That goes back to what Scott said before too. They throw all this stuff out there, but they don't deal with their own stuff at all.
Exactly. And on that note, this bishop is offering Jesus or God as a fix to some kind of depression. Yet we don't see any depression being fixed within the church itself. So why would that even be attracted? Why would that even be attractive to skeptics or atheists at all? In any case, folks, thank you for joining us for this segment. And if you want to hear more content from the nonprofits, please click the link below.